Yes, Sir Julian. Like to come up? Just like to introduce Sir Julian Smith, who's going to give you a little bit of a talk about who am I. So I better not say too much because I'll steal his thunder. What I will say is he's Dunedin born and bred. He's the managing director of Allied Press, co-owner with his brother of the business, and he's definitely an Otago man. So over to you, Julian.
Thank you, Ray. Only Danny Blackburn would think of a silly title like Who Am I? I can probably answer that in about 1 minute. And I know you've had a very busy program this afternoon, running late, so perhaps that's all I should do, because it does remind me once about the professor who was introduced by a speaker that Ray, not quite like Ray, but it went on a bit longer than Ray, introduced a speaker, and the subject was sex. And the professor was sitting there and listening to all this talk about himself and so forth. And when he got to the finish, the chap sat down and he handed the floor over to him, and the fellow got up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me much pleasure," and sat down. I could do the same sort of thing, not quite with the sex part, but say that, well, I'm 70 and feel about 80 sometimes, and 20 the rest of the time. And born and bred in Dunedin, as he said, but if it's looking at me or how I got to where I am, I guess it is a bit entwined with the history of the newspapers in Dunedin, so I'll probably spend a few moments and tell you about that and how I got to where I am today. My family background was in the evening newspaper, the Evening Star in Dunedin. The opposition was the Otago Daily Times. But in those days, back when I left school, which was 1961 at the end of it, most of the major cities had two papers, a morning and the evening paper, and that was the case here in Dunedin with the Times and the Star. I was never encouraged to go into the business. They said I wouldn't be up to it, and my father wouldn't have anything to do with that, and he was the managing director and chairman of the Evening Star. So I grew up in a newspaper family. So I thought, what am I going to do? When I left school, I was very lucky. I didn't have to bribe the masters, but I did get accredited with university entrance, and a few of my friends were going to do commerce. So I thought, oh, well, got to do something. So got to be qualified, my father said. So I thought, well, I'll do commerce. And in those days, those courses were part-time, which is probably a good thing, like apprenticeship in printing or anything like that. It's very good to have the practical experience. So I got a job working for a chartered accountant who just about one block down here, and that was a very old firm that had started in the early days of Dunedin, and it had a lot of the old audits from some of the major companies in New Zealand, and for example the Briscoes, and that was formed by a company in the Hudson Bay originally. A lot of history in Dunedin, because by the year 1900 Dunedin was the leading city in New Zealand. It had the population, had all the industry, the shipbuilding, many other industries, right from confectionery through whatever, soap, the whole lot. And a lot of those firms were still in existence in 1961. So I spent quite a bit of time auditing, which was quite boring. But nevertheless, after 4 years, I was getting a bit sick of all that, and I thought, well, I'm not doing too well at finishing off my exams at university, so I better I'll try and go full-time and clean it up. So my father, the moment he heard that, he said, "You'll never get up in the morning, and you should be having a job." So I found a job advertised in the paper. It was in the fruit and produce markets, a bit like for you people from the North Island, if you know where that is. The Turners and Growers, which are the main ones here. So the equivalent of Turners and Growers were 5 firms in Dunedin at that stage, and I went to the biggest one of them, and I thought, oh, well, I'll only be for a year or two, and I'll get time off, as I asked for, to go to university, and I got the job. Well, the job became quite interesting, and I didn't go to university, but I knew enough about accounting. I could do the whole thing, and I'll challenge any other accountants to trip me up even today. But I had that job, and which was to be, as I say, only going to be for a couple of years, and I thought I'd move on. But there was a time of mergers, and mergers were happening about that stage, and the people said to me, "Oh, we're merging and building a new marketing complex right out on the foreshore out here." And I finished up being offered the job as secretary, so I finished up there, which was more of a full-time job than I anticipated, but that was great fun. And from there, when I was 26 I think, I got offered the job of manager of one of the opposition companies, which was John M. Fraser and Co., which won't mean much to the North Islanders, but I went in there as manager, and that's the way it was. It was a happy sort of existence. Meanwhile, and that was about 1970, the two-newspaper town was progressing, but things were getting difficult. The evening papers were starting to struggle with against television, etc. And anyway, they were still operating on their own, and then my father unfortunately died and was suddenly in 1974, and he was chairman and, as I say, and chief executive of the Evening Star. So my uncle, who was on the board, and the family relationship with the Evening Star went back to 1867. My great-great-grandfather came to, who had been a manager of a business in Sheffield in England. And why he came out to Australia first to have a look around and brought a large family of about 5 out. And he came on to Dunedin to have a look at the gold rushes in 1861, when they were just starting. And he was a man, and then he must have been about in his 50s. And why he was doing that I don't know, but he worked for Sir Julius Vogel, who was one of the original partners in the Otago Daily Times. Sir Julius Vogel became the Premier of New Zealand only after he had been sacked from having a fight with his fellow shareholders in the ODT in about 1863 or something. And that was the first daily newspaper, and is the first daily newspaper, the ODT. And the Evening Star was in there about I think the second it was started as a fully daily paper in 1863. So my great-great-grandfather didn't quite know what to do when he was fired from there, so he thought, I'll start my own newspaper. So he started called the Independent, and within about 3 years, the Evening Star, which was also running along, went into receivership with the owners of those days, and he bought, the great-great-grandfather bought that company from the receiver. And that's how, and then he incorporated the titles together, and it ran successfully right through until this period I'm talking about. And but the Star was pretty innovative too. They went into other things. They were the first in New Zealand to produce envelopes, and I don't know whether people remember that the brand was Zealandia, sent it all over New Zealand. They were in a number of early things, but anyway, by the time it got around to my father, who died in 1974, it was a public company, so that the shares could be on the open market. So there were relatives that lived in Australia, had never been to New Zealand, and if they wanted to get out, how did they get out? So it had been turned into a public company, as many had in about the 1960s. So my uncle, although it was still controlled by the family, came to me and gave me a letter and said, look, not because you're family, but because you've done all right in the businesses you're in, we need to get a younger person on the board, and we invite you to join. And he proceeded, and I've kept the letter. He said, you go to the Commercial Travellers Club and you drink too much, and you've got to be careful not to say too much, and it's a very responsible job. And I've kept that letter. Anyway, that's what happened, and not long after we came upon the idea of a merger to become Allied Press. Now, in the Star, we'd worked it out that what was happening with evening newspapers wasn't a great future the way things were going, so the best thing we could do would be to merge with the morning paper. And as an outside director, as I still had my job as manager of the produce business. We got our heads together and talked to the Otago Daily Times directors, and that brought about the merger became Allied Press, running 2 newspapers daily, the morning paper and the evening paper. And what happened after that is, and it happened pretty well within New Zealand, is that the advertising, people said, it's all owned by the same people, so advertising went to the stronger one, which was the morning at that stage, and gradually it was slipping away. So we closed the Star. I had the unfortunate privilege of having to close it as chairman of the Evening Star by that stage in about 1976, was it? Hey? 79. So we closed it then and replaced it with a free paper, which is the Star. I don't know that it gets printed tomorrow, but and anyway, so as an outside director, that was okay, and I was sitting on this board about 79, and then there was moves afoot within New Zealand. A lot of mergers and takeovers were taking place, and we noticed on the share register there was a number of nominee companies coming onto the share register of Allied Press. And then one day a share broker came to me and said, "Oh, look, you're the youngest," he said, "of all those old fellows on your board. Would you like to come? We've got something to talk to you about." And that was one of the first corporate raids in New Zealand. It was a fellow, the Bruce Judge, you may have heard of him in earlier days. And he, on behalf of a man that had a lot of money somewhere, had been buying the shares, and the share broker had been putting the transfers under the desk, so he never registered. And I said to them, there's nobody on the share register that's got any great number of shares outside the sort of family ones. Well, yes, he said, we've got 15%, and pulled out these transfers, which was rather a shady sort of a trick, and I think the law of the stock exchange changed after that you had to register transfers when they came in, sort of thing. But anyway, the move afoot then, how do we protect the company and the ownership in Dunedin? And the board all met and talked about it, and they found a company that just happened to suit, that could perhaps mount a takeover, which became a reverse takeover, and that was the produce company I was working for. So that seemed to be that my boss, who owned his company, he got granted so many shares in Allied Press in exchange for his business, which made him the largest shareholder. There was other shareholders within the family group that sort of kept the figures over 50% of the total holding, so therefore nobody could take it over from wherever they came from. So that's then suddenly me and my boss, who was the chairman of his company, we said, well, if we're going to be dragged into a public company, there'll be one thing: I'll be the managing director, thanks, and he'll be the chairman. Now, if you want us to step in and help save the papers, that's the rules. So anyway, they all went along with it, and we started off, and that became known as Otago Press and Produce, a public company, and we did very well for some 4 or 5 years until, well, we did well, full stop, but around about 1984 it became evident that there was a lot of share transfers going through once again, this time under the nominee company, so we didn't know who owned them. And it was suspected that the whole chain of events were taking place. A number of mergers had happened with the newspapers. The biggest of the newspaper groups then was the Christchurch Star and the Auckland Star New Zealand newspapers, and that was Briley had got himself in there, and so it looked like the whole thing was going to happen again. There was going to be a great fight for the paper. So my boss, the old chairman, said to me, well, look, he said, you should do something about this. I said, well, what can I do about it? I haven't got any. He said, oh, you should privatise it. And I said, what with? And I said, there's some interest from the family interest if I can get that, and but to make a takeover bid for the whole place would seem to be beyond it. And he said he would leave some money in to help do it. And in fact, I thought, well, if it gets taken over by New Zealand newspapers, the first person to be out of a job will be myself, probably. So I guess self-preservation, decided to have a go and borrowed a lot of money, and it worked. And that's who I am. That's how I got where I am, and that's why I'm still here today, because I still haven't got anybody to work it from the future on. Ray Clarkson's going to retire, he tells me, and I should have retired years ago. So that's basically how the paper is today. And since we've been in that position, what we had to do was, when it was all merged originally, when I took it over, we had to sell off a number of the assets that weren't core to the newspaper business. We were involved with half of a Naylor Lover building construction company here, and a number of other businesses, and they were all realised to help finance that takeover. But since then we've extended a bit into the community newspaper areas in the South Island, and I must say they're going very well. In terms of an industry, there's a lot that could be done. I think that the newspaper industry is getting bad-mouthed, basically starting from the two groups, bad-mouthing the future of print, which is silly, because even if you believed it, you shouldn't tell people. To do what you can with it. But we know that whoever advertises in the Otago Daily Times, they get good results, and that's all you can do. And why don't we build on it? I'm sure that the same would be with the other newspapers in New Zealand. They should all get in behind and try and work together. we're not the immediacy for the newspaper that you might get out of the internet, but there's so many things you could do in terms of knowledge, so many things you could impart that would add value to your papers. If, for example, there's not many players in New Zealand, if they got their heads together as a newspaper industry like they used to, you could do all sorts of things. How many people have grizzled and groaned about, the weather in Dunedin? Now you look at television immediately the night before, and I get rung from Auckland, how's things down there? I see you've got snow right around your place, and aren't you cold? And I said, no, it's a day like today, which is fairly typical of Dunedin, but they never get the weather right. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. They take the weather down to 1,500 feet. Well, where's that? That's the way up on top of the mountains out there. So Dunedin hasn't got snow up and down the main street. Now why don't we, as we could as an industry, say, you're not the immediacy, why don't we the next day we say, how did they go? Here's the major centres. This is the weather was reported on television. This is what it was. There's all sorts of things we could do as an industry, and I think it could be quite exciting. But we do need to get back and send the message to the advertisers that there's value in the newspapers. Results count. Forget about the agencies and the commissions they're going to earn if they go to some of these other media. If the customer wants to sell his product, he can go through to the newspapers. And I just hope that people will realise that. We have changes at the top all the time. A lot of it's coming from Australia, and they are different there. I see you're over here from Australia too. So, and of course, he took me out in his boat when I was over there before, and Kerwin's come over. He always dodges us because his machinery is often breaking down, and he doesn't. And of course, on that subject, because you're here basically on machinery, with Ray Clarkson, and when we came bought the Evening Star building over there, which was a freehold property and a good building, and the ODT, when you walk over to see the press and so forth, on your left as you go past, somebody will point it out as a car park. That was the old ODT building, not far away from ours. But when we merged, we said, we'll bring over the gloss press from the ODT and put it into the Evening Star. And the reason the Star they both bought presses in 1965. The Evening Star bought a Viscount, which was a good press, and the ODT people thought their press was the best, and Ray Clarkson will tell you that. So they said, we'll bring the gloss headliner over and put it into the Evening Star premises. So when we did that, I was able to get a sale for the Viscount, which went to Timaru to INL. And anyway, we installed the ODT press and had the foundations done, and the building you're going to is actually on the foreshore of the original harbour line, and it's pretty boggy. And we put good foundations in and started up the ODT press and ran it for a couple of years like that, and then the chief engineer one day came and he said something a bit strange. He'd been checking the oil levels, and he said there's a sight glass on the side to show the level. He said, but one end the oil's above the line and the other end it's below the line. Anyway, a bit of careful looking around found that the actual foundations were subsiding, which wasn't good. So how did we get out of it? And it was a bit fortuitous again, because it just happened that the Christchurch Press was going to offset, and they were getting rid of their old headliner, which is the same model. So we purchased 2 units from them, and was it 2 units? It was 2, yeah, and the folder. And we built alongside this where this other press was, and put a big foundation. You'll see the area, it's just been converted again, and we bought the 2 units in from the Christchurch press, put them in the folder and got that working, and then we were able to limited our paging, went back to 48 or something, wasn't it? And whilst we then swung around, pulled out one of the other units off our press, joined them up, so we're back to a 3 unit, and then we gradually brought them around, which gave us 5 double width units in the finish, 2 folders and well backed up, and we stuck with letterpress then right through to, we went to offset, and we're probably about the last in the world to change to offset. So our payback was pretty good, because we experimented, of course, with colour by putting in a Civilox unit, and Horton did the same in Auckland, and that lasted us, filled a gap there, gave us a bit more colour, and then we decided that we'd have to bite the bullet at the end of the day, and you could have bought second hand, but we decided we'd buy new, and that's where Kerwin put it across us. And I had to write to him because he told us Ray Clarkson's very conservative, and he said, this idea of these presses that they don't have a shaft, shaftless, and these shaftless presses. He said, we're way down near the South Pole, or halfway there, and what happens if something goes wrong with that sort of technology? I wouldn't trust all that electronic gear. Well, he said, I think we should have a shafted press. And Kerwin, of course, agreed. He said, well, it's marvellous. He said, we don't want to follow. Who are the other, the Germans? What are their names? No, it wasn't Man. No, it was KBA. We were looking at a KBA press, and they had been shaftless for quite a while. Kerwin, no, you're quite right. No, put a shaft in. So we did. And then about a month after it went in, there's a newsletter comes out from Goss saying, look, this is the way to go. You've got to go shaftless. Save you so much in power. Save you so much. And with all these things. So I wrote to him and said, we've been shafted. Anyway, it's good to see Kerwin here, and we'll get stuck into him at some stage. So that's basically where we are. We've put in, as I say, community papers, and they're going quite well. But we're suffering in national advertising because I think it's an industry problem, and we've got to address that and get around it. And I don't want to speak any longer. It's bloody hot and stuffy in here, and I had one look at the door before and thought, why can't they get a bit of ventilation in here? But anyway, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and with that, I'll let you get back on the timetable. Thank you very much. Oh, what's this? Oh, that's good.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Most of that was accurate. I won't mention the other things. Anyway, we're off to the ADT very shortly. We're running up against time, so I'm going to speak now. Then you can dash out, have some afternoon tea, and then we'll be on our way. We're about 2 blocks away, 3 blocks. So it's not too bad. The sun's out. It'll be a nice walk. And as Julian said, on your left as you go down, you'll pass the Queen's Gardens, and there's an empty section there, which is where the old ADT building was. The area we're going into is fairly compact. We didn't have a lot of room when we had to put up those new press facilities, so it's reasonably compact, and unfortunately today is our busiest day. So there's a lot of activity going on in the press room and in the publishing room, and we've got to put all you people through that, so it's not going to be very easy. I've got 5 people leading parties. There'll be 10 in a group, and they'll be doing 2 each, so hopefully we'll get us all through. It's going to take about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes per group to go around. I require you to wear earplugs when you're in the press room. It's for health and safety reasons. And around the press, there's red lines on the floor, painted on the floor. If we can keep on the safe side of those red lines. I know I don't have to tell you that because everyone here will be familiar with presses. In the publishing area, we'll walk right down through the front, through the middle of the publishing area. There's quite a bit of activity going on there, so it'll give you a chance to look around. And we'll assemble outside the building, just outside that building, and you can make your way back to the hotel at that point. I think that the buses are leaving at round about 6, is it, Dan? 6 o'clock? So yes, we're running close to time now, so you'll probably be having to move from about here on, okay? I can't tell you much else. The rest is going to be what you see, and the picture tells 1,000 words. Any questions? Don't hesitate to ask. Sorry? Yes, sure.
Right, excuse me, could groups 1 to 5, are you listening guys? Groups 1 to 5, you are the first to leave, and I believe Russell you are going to be taking, so he'll be at the front doors. Afternoon tea is ready now in the restaurant. There are takeaway cups for groups 1 to 5. If you could go now, could the others just wait? If you're in groups 6 to 10, could you wait? and go out. And then tonight you must be at the foyer at 6 o'clock. The buses will depart sharply. We're not waiting for people if they're not here, so you need to be in the foyer by 6 this evening. Thank you. And it's dressed up this evening, everyone.
Who's taking the other two groups?
Russell, these two boys, what the other two, yeah.
Who you got?
We've only got one, the next 6 to 10 are going out together, aren't they? We've got 6 to 10 as the next group. So we've got 1 to 5 going out now.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, yeah. And it'll be good for them because it's too hot and stuffy in this bloody room. I have talked to them about the air conditioning, and they said they can't do anything because they've got to move this guy here at the moment. They couldn't. Yeah.
Cities built on battlefields and shopping malls.